I took a job shortly after college and had to move quickly. I used my social media to get in touch with a landlord through a friend we both know. They had an extra unit that was just freed up. The last tenant had been kicked out a few weeks before because they hadn't paid their rent, thus the apartment hadn't even been marketed yet. The flat was fine, but I was too busy with my new work to care. I just took a bed and a desktop computer, so for now, 2 of my 3 rooms are empty. I wasn't sure if I was going to stay there for a long time or not, but I thought time would tell. I ended up living there for a few years. I got used to my job, decorated the place, and made it a real home. Those initial several weeks of worry are now just a memory. I had to put away some furnishings about 3 years after I moved in. I called my landlord to ask if there was any extra space I could utilize for storage. He told me again that there was storage on the bottom floor that I hadn't used yet. I had no idea it was there. Not that surprising, since I was pretty worried out when I initially moved in. It looks like the last tenant used the space and may have left some things behind. I had never needed a space like that before, so I hadn't thought to inquire. So I was shocked when I got to the storage and saw a crash test dummy. I used a key I acquired from the landlord to open the padlock and take a closer look. There was a white crash test dummy that looked like a person. Someone had quickly written Mr. Mayhem on the back of its head using a black Sharpie. The dummy's face was scratched and worn, but it still had a plastic smile. The dark specks that were its eyes were only painted on. It seemed like it had been through a lot of pain. I asked the landlord about it. The last renter had exploited it as a kind of mascot. They took it out for fun things like parties, pranks, and that kind of thing. My landlord said that he saw him use it to cheat the carpool lane once. He acquired it from work when they switched to newer dummies, and it was just a funny thing. It was probably over 40 years old. I cleaned out the storeroom and put my furniture away. I thought about what to do with Mr. Mayhem and decided it would be a wonderful decoration. For my Halloween party, I could put something on it and put it by the door. People would talk about it all the time. Still, it made me feel uneasy, the way it creaked and cracked at the joints. That smile that was frozen and plastered on. The joints are loose and rattle around with every little movement. My Halloween celebration every year isn't very fancy. I get some friends together and we put on costumes. After that, we went to a costume party at one of the local clubs. There are just around 18 people there, so it's like a pre-party. I put Mr. Mayhem in a cheap pirate costume and had him stand at the door with a tray of food. I dressed up like a penguin, but everyone thought I was the Monopoly man. Round 7. People came by. People loved Mr. Mayhem. People just don't like dummies and dolls for some reason. I think it's the uncanny valley thing. That night, it was the main thing in a lot of selfies. We all departed for the club as the punch bowl got emptier and the night got darker. Mr. Mayhem stayed by the door. I had a great time, but I drank too much. There was some drama when 2 of my friends got into a fight, but overall, it was a fantastic night. A friend of mine won the costume contest with a bioluminescent fish thing. It was crazy. You really stepped up if you have to charge batteries for your outfit. At the time, I couldn't see anything wrong, but if I had paid more attention, I would have heard a few things. There were cracks and creaks coming from the alley behind the house as something moved. A bouncer spoke about a guy who looked like a crash test dummy. There was a black shape right outside the bathroom window with frosted glass. I got home at the end of the night and put the keys in the door, but I saw that it was already open. I could have sworn I locked it, but I guess I missed it in all the noise. I did a half-drunk check around the apartment to make sure nothing was missing. There wasn't. I didn't even think to look for Mr. Mayhem. I would have seen that there was nothing outside the entrance waiting for me with snacks if I had. I would have seen the bowl roll off to the side and drop wrapped toffees and butter caramels all over the floor. No, though. I fell face first into my bed and waited for another day. I didn't know it was gone until the next morning. I texted a few people at the party and asked whether they did anything to it. The answer was a loud no. They probably just thought it was a fun prop. I looked everywhere in the flat and the storeroom. I even asked the people next door whether they had seen anything. Nothing at all. There was no sign of Mr. Mayhem. It wasn't a big deal, but I didn't enjoy the notion of someone being in my flat for no reason. Things don't just go away for no reason. I could have sold a crash test dummy for a quick $100 if someone wanted one. Instead, I kept going back and forth, getting more and more worried that someone was in my area. I even called the landlord to ask him to change the locks. Mr. Mayhem was still missing the next Monday. I still thought about it, but I had 100 other things that were more important. It had begun to rain, and I had walked across the parking lot without thinking when I was almost at the front door. Something in the back of my mind told me to halt. It's hard to put into words, like a sudden feeling of discomfort, a challenge to take a deeper look. So I did it. I could see Mr. Mayhem as I turned around and looked up. It was on the roof of my apartment building, and its head was pointing straight ahead. Someone must have pulled it up there for fun. It appeared like someone was going to jump from a building. I was going to have to take it down. Didn't want to hurt anyone by accident. I ran directly to the door to the stairway, holding a file folder over my head. The rain just wouldn't stop. Something hit the ground directly in front of me. When Mr. Mayhem hit the ground, there was a huge plastic bang. If he had gone a few feet further, I would have been crushed. I stood there for a bit listening. To the rain hit the file folder on my head. Mr. Mayhem was still alive, but the body was in bad shape. Every limb was bent at an odd angle, but that didn't stop the creepy painted-on smile. I was a little scared to touch it. My heart was racing. That object was hefty, and it had fallen far enough to hurt someone badly. It almost hit me, but it didn't. I pulled it back down to the basement where it was stored. I had to move some furniture around, and in the end, I threw it on top of an old couch. I closed the door behind me, switched off the lights, and locked the storage with a padlock. I'd get rid of the thing quite quickly. That night, I went to bed early. I kept shaking and twitching, as if my body was still in shock from Mr. Mayhem. Crashing into the sidewalk right in front of me, I felt jittery, like I hadn't slowed down yet. I was locked in high gear, and it lasted till the next morning. Before I even ate breakfast, I cleaned my kitchen and bedroom because I was so stressed. While I was cleaning the fridge and the area around it, I found what seemed like an old, faded letter or post-it that the last tenant must have stuck to the fridge. Don't let it go. I stood there for a long time, staring at the note and letting my worry run wild. I tried to talk myself out of it, but every thought kept coming back to the same thing. There must have been a reason why Mr. Mayhem was left behind. What happened to the person who lived there before? I thought about how to get rid of it for the next few days. I considered about just driving it to a dump and leaving it there, but I didn't like the notion of it being let out. I could set it on fire, but I needed a suitable place to do it. I could just sell it, but it didn't seem like the right thing to do either. I was getting impatient and out of ideas, so I finally decided to cut it up and throw it into the river. I packed a rucksack with a hammer, duct tape, a saw, and trash bags. The next night, I went to work. I pulled Mr. Mayhem out of the car and put him in the trunk. I didn't want to do it during the day since it still looked like a person, and I didn't want to have to explain myself. I was going to drive down to an open area by the river and start to work. It wasn't far, but I had to cross the road. It was a short drive, but it was stressful. I thought I was doing something wrong, like Mr. Mayhem was a real person instead of a dummy. I took a deep breath and closed the trunk before getting behind the wheel. As soon as I placed the keys in, I got a peculiar feeling that I should have taped its hands and feet together. But why should I? It was a fake. I had to wait at 2 different left turns. Every time, I just sat there and listened to the engine hum, waiting to hear a thumping or smacking sound coming from the trunk. I thought the thing would do something. It didn't make sense to listen for it, but I couldn't help it. But nothing occurred. I crossed the highway, walked down the river, and found a place by a clearing where I wouldn't bother anyone. I parked my car, stepped out, and held my breath while I unlocked the trunk. For a brief moment, I could picture a real person lying there, screaming and begging for rescue. I blinked it away as the trunk opened up to show Mr. Mayhem in all his lifeless glory. There was nothing to be afraid of here. It was still going to be uncomfortable to hack up anything that looked like a person. I pulled it out to the riverbank, put my tools out and looked at it closely. First, I grabbed the hammer to break the joints that would make it easy to cut. The item was built to take a lot of abuse. It wouldn't be easy to break it. I did the left hand first as a kind of test run. I hit the joints and got the saw out, but every time I did, I felt terrible to my stomach. I had never heard of bone cracking, but I thought that was it. I felt like a butcher, and those eyes, which were just little dots of paint, made me feel like they were burrowing into my mind. A cheap copy of a person, yet still a person. I skipped a few steps and pointed the hammer right at its face. I hit the dummy over and over with the hammer until it broke. The nose bent inwards, and the cheeks broke into pieces that looked like butterflies. I used my nails to pick out the pieces. I shivered. There was some kind of cushioning on the inside that made my skin crawl. There was something about how it felt. I stopped. There was a little white growth, a tooth. I took a step back and looked down at the smashed dummy. A dead guy was buried under the fractured surface, mummified and dry inside the plastic shell. I couldn't get any air. It had been there the whole time, right in front of me. I couldn't even start to think clearly because there were so many things to do. Who did I talk to? What did I do? Could I be responsible for some form of damage? Who was in there? Were they gone? I let go of the hammer and stepped back. I covered my lips and took small breaths, saying "Oh my God" over and over again, as if the rocking motion would somehow bring a wonderful notion to the front of my head. I made up my mind to go back to my car and call the cops. I rushed back, climbed in the driver's seat, and shut the door. I pulled out my phone, called the police, and then I heard a click. I turned to the left. Something quick came my way. And then the world turned upside down in a rapid jolt of anguish. I went in and out of consciousness. I was in a little dark place. I must have spent at least 10 minutes trying to figure out that I was in the trunk of my car, and that it was moving. I could hear the radio, even though it was turned down. There was a bump on my nose and left eye, and I could tell that my balance was off. I tried to get my phone, but it was still in the passenger seat. I never got around to calling the police. The car stopped at some point. I heard the door on the driver's side open and close, and then I heard someone walk away. It was a tiny echo, which made it sound like we were parked inside, maybe in a big space. I didn't waste any time. Instead of trying to unlock the trunk, I crawled and wriggled my way into the rear seat. After that, I twisted myself into the driver's seat, locked the doors, and looked for my cell phone. I could tell I was in some kind of storage space by looking up every now and then. It was hard to say. The lights were out. When I touched the cold metal of the phone, I picked it up, unlocked it, and called the police. It didn't take long for someone to answer on the other end. I stuttered. "I've been kidnapped. I don't know where I am, but I may have heard the footsteps coming back if I hadn't been so loud. I could have seen it in the rearview mirror if I had been more careful. But I was noisy and not paying attention, and it cost me a lot. The driver's side window broke into 1,000 pieces while the operator asked me for my name and where I lived. Something gripped my neck and shoulder. A second later, I was thrown out the window and into the sidewalk, which was about 8 feet away. A white plastic foot smashed the cell phone, which fell to the ground. I could see it well when I looked up. Mr. Mayhem, now showing a grin like a death's head. I ran. I stood up and ran away. I heard plastic banging behind me as Mr. Mayhem chased me. I rushed right through a lunchroom and an empty workshop. Finally, I shoved the door open to a place that wasn't marked, hoping against hope that it might be beneficial. A little room full of crash test dummies, at least 50 of them, standing close together. All those painted smiles and eyes that looked like dots were all looking at me. I didn't have time to find out if they were like Mr. Mayhem or not, so instead of turning back, which would have been the end, I kept on. I pushed through plastic arms, hands, and torsos. Most of them were merely empty shells that might be filled and used. Others worked perfectly. I thought I saw a few heads glance my way, but I didn't pause to check. I could hear the footsteps behind me getting slower, and as I turned around, I saw that I had no idea where they had gone. There were a lot of white animals with no features, but one of them was different. I was scared to move. I might be brushing up against that object without even knowing it. There was a loud noise. like broken glass being moved around on the floor. There was a clear sound of a fragment being picked up. I wanted to go to the rear of the room so I could go back the way I came, every now and again. I'd peek at the dummies and see that more of them had writing on the back of their heads. Miss Waters, Mr. Calhoun, everything made using quick scribbles. I had a random thought. It may have been Mayhew instead of Mr. Mayhem. It was hard to tell, though. As I started to circle the dark corners of the room and head back the way I still hadn't run into it. I heard glass scratching against plastic as something got closer. I had to keep myself from freaking out. If I were to trip and fall in there, I had no idea what would happen. Instead, I kept a steady pace and tried to keep track of my breathing. 1, 2, 1, 2. I halted when I bumped into another dummy. There was something odd. It didn't have a hand on the left. It gently turned toward me, showing me the face of a dead man. Mr. Mayhem, a glass shard that wasn't plan cut. Me, brushing the edge of my jacket and breaking against the wall. A left arm without a hand sought for me, but I pushed it away. I knocked over the dummies that were not alive and went right to the door. I slammed the door shut after I got there and left the dummies behind. I quickly checked to see if there was a lock, but there wasn't. The door fell from its hinges and hit the ground like a broken bowling pin. Before I could develop a plan, Mr. Mayhem jerked forward, and each movement was quick and terrible. As I walked back to the workshop, I knew I couldn't outrun it. Mr. Mayhem was both quicker and stronger. I was reaching for straws. There had to be something. Anything. I ducked under a chain that was dropping down from the ceiling and kept heading toward the back, but then I stopped. That chain, I could use it. It was linked to a winch in the middle of the manufacturing floor, which was probably used to lift and move things. It would have to do. The timing had to be just right. If I went too early or too late, I would be in trouble. I noticed Mr. Mayhem coming closer and closer, his painted eyes now empty voids. Then I tugged on the winch as hard as I could, hoping against hope. It worked right away. I didn't see the hook at the end. It went straight up and pierced Mr. Mayhem's bottom jaw. The chain was still loose, and it was getting closer, but it couldn't quite reach me anymore. Instead, I kept tugging and pushing and pulling each time the chain rattled. It went higher and higher into the air, like raising a flag. Mr. Mayhem was hanging about 15 feet in the air when the chain clicked into place. It stopped moving. I could tell it was looking at me and planning something, even though it couldn't move its face. This wasn't supposed to be the end. As I cleaned up the broken glass from the driver's seat, I called the police and made my way back to the car. When I was asked where I was, I saw something on one of the far walls. A row of overalls hanging by the door. 3, to be exact. 1 for a Patty Waters. The last one is for Samson Mayhew, while the second one is for John Calhoun. The police finally showed up. I had gone outdoors and fell against a wall, smashing a few wildflowers that had grown too big on my way down. When the police came to ask me questions, I was just sitting there picking the petals off a blue sunflower. I tried to tell them that I had been kidnapped and hurt, yet I couldn't tell them that the crash test dummy had done it. I had to lie. Through my teeth, though, I had to state that the person who attacked me had lifted that dummy up into the air. The police didn't have to look long to uncover 3 bodies. 3 workers who were last seen at the abandoned plant are thought to be dead and missing. They were found packed into the frames of crash test dummies they produced decades ago. About 2 years ago, give or take a few months. I haven't seen or heard anything about those dummies since then. I believe they emptied the storage area and had some kind of forensic expert on site, but there was no public charge or notification. I was just called in once to give a simple statement, and there was no follow-up. I've been picturing those 3 idiots tied up in a storage room, waiting for anything to happen. That dead face waiting for me to look at it again. The reason I'm writing this is because of something I read last month. There was a story about a break-in at the county evidence locker that hurt one officer and caused some evidence to go missing. There were 2 males and a woman who attacked. People said they were bald and wore basic white garments. I would wager that it won't be long until we see more than 3 of these Mrs. and Mrs. I'm very sure there was an empty case there. That would have my name on it if I hadn't left. Maybe there still is.